All right, if you haven't been with us, for the past couple of weeks, we've been in this series called What's Holding You Back, where, surprise, surprise, we're taking some time and simply talking about the things that hold us back in life. Because all of us are here today, we all have things in our life that we feel like we need to be doing, right? We all have things that we feel like we need to accomplish. Maybe you're here today, and you feel like God's calling you to do something. Maybe for you, that's something big, like a big life change. Maybe for you, that's relocating. That's a big life change. I do not like relocating. That's no fun. But maybe God's calling you to do something like that. Maybe for you, it's a new career. Maybe for you, it's downsizing. That's hard, isn't it? So maybe you're here today and God's calling you to do a big life change. Or maybe for you, God's calling you to do something slightly smaller, thankfully, but still pretty powerful, right? Because understand something. I think we fall into this trap, don't we? We fall into the trap of believing that the big things that God does only comes out of big life-changing moments in our life. And what we need to understand is that it's not just about the big things, it's about the little things that happen consistently over time. And so maybe for you, the thing that God's calling you to do is to just invest in the lives of the people around you, your friends, your family, your coworkers, the people at school. Maybe for you, it's somebody else. That God's calling you to do something not quite as drastic as a big life change, but consistent. Maybe for you, God's calling you to do something else. That we all have these things that we feel like we're supposed to be doing, we need to be doing. And the question we're asking as we go through this series is just, what's stopping you? What's holding you back? What's keeping you from actually doing the things that God's calling you to do? Now, as we've gone through this series, one of the things I've talked about a lot is this idea of responsibility and taking responsibility for the things that God has given us. And really, as we've gone through this series, what we've been doing is focusing on the excuses, right? Like the reasons why we don't do the things that we all know we need to be doing. And so today, as we continue, I want to talk about what I think at least is probably the most common excuse that we come up with. And in fact, the reason we use this one all the time is because it's easy. This is something I guarantee you that every single one of us has done at one point in our life or another. It doesn't matter if you're here today and this is your first time in church, if you've been in church all your life. I don't care if you're here today and you're supposed to be in kids ministry, but you're here because, well, you just want to be here. Like all of us have done this at one point in our life or another. Today, I want to take some time and talk about blame. Because we are masters at blaming other people, aren't we? And the thing is this is something that starts really, really early in life. How many of us remember when we were kids and we'd get in trouble, right? We get busted doing something. Maybe it was something you weren't supposed to do, or maybe it was like not doing something you were supposed to do. But how many of you remember that time when you were a kid and you were busted, you were caught, and your first reaction, and it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction, right? You do this without even thinking. But your first reaction was to blame like your brother or your sister. Did anybody do that? I know you did. My son's in the front row raising his hand. I know because I busted you every single time. Or at least I think so. I don't know. See, the problem was I was essentially an only child. My sister was like 11 years older. She was out of the house before I could really remember. I didn't have anybody to blame but like mom and dad. That didn't work really well because I'm blaming mom and dad to mom and dad. So, that just never worked. But maybe for you, you'd blame a sibling, right? Because it's just what we do. And the thing is it's not like we really grow out of this. We do this even in middle school and high school, right? You got that project that you were supposed to do, but you didn't really do it. I mean, you didn't, but you didn't do it well. You kind of put it together last minute and you turned it in. Mom and dad said, hey, why'd you get this bad grade? What'd you say? Oh, you don't understand. I was just really, really busy. I had all of this stuff going on. I had practice after school. I had work. I had all of these extra things. All my teachers were piling stuff on. It's so unfair. I just didn't have the time. When really you had the time, you just didn't want to do it. We do this as adults. How many of us have ever gotten that project at work that we didn't want to do? And so we put it off to the last minute, right? Procrastination kicks in. We wait till the last minute. Finally, we hurry up. It's like the deadline. We hurry up. We do it. We turn it in. It wasn't great. It wasn't even good, but it's done. It's off your plate. You forget about it for a while till your boss calls you in. And they're like, hey, what's up with this? Like, I've seen your work before. This is terrible. What's going on here? And without even thinking, what do? Find somebody to blame. Oh, you don't understand. Like, I tried to do it, but the problem was Bob in accounting. You know Bob, right? You know how Bob is. Bob always waits till the last minute, and it's really hard to get back with him. He's one of those guys that you text, and like 2 hours, 3 hours later, he finally texts you back. I was waiting on Bob. And so when Bob finally got it to me, I didn't have a lot of time, and so I was really rushed. Or sometimes we don't even blame people. We'll blame computer programs. And that's a great one, right? Because let's be real, technology is always breaking down, isn't it? Technology is always breaking down. Oh, you don't understand. It crashed. I did the best that I could, but I crashed at the last minute. I lost all my information. I had to scramble and put it all together. And so it's not my fault. It's the program's fault, which is the program that you picked out. So when you stop and think about it, it's kind of your fault, right? It's so easy to blame. I mean, we even blame God, especially whenever bad things happen in life, especially when the bottom falls out. And it's like everything that can go bad does go bad. We're like, God, where are you? Why is this happening? Why are you not even paying attention, God? What's going on? You see, blame is easy, isn't it? We all blame somebody at some point for something. And a lot of times it's really our fault, but we don't want to go there. And the problem is that blame is one of those things that if we're not careful, because it's so easy, it's like a habit. We don't even realize we're doing it. And because of that, blame, if we're not careful, can become one of those things that chronically holds us back in life and keeps you from stepping into the life that God created you to live. And in fact, to help us with this today, if you've got your Bible, do me a favor. Turn with me to Joshua chapter 7. I want to look at a story out of Joshua chapter 7. Today, we're going to look at the story of Joshua and the Israelites as they try to take the city of Ai. And so again, Joshua chapter 7. And while you're turning there, just kind of a little bit of background for today's story. This story takes place after Israel has wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, right? So for 40 years, they've been in the wilderness. Moses is dead, by the way. He has died, and now Joshua, who is like his right-hand man, is in charge. And of course, now is the time that God goes to Joshua and says, now we're going to take the promised land. Because, you couldn't do it before I was in charge. You waited till this moment, right? And so God says, okay, we're going to take the promised land. By the way, how many of us, whenever we hear the story of Israel taking the promised land, do we just kind of picture like this mass genocide? Do you know what I mean? How many of us, when we read the story, do we read it as if it's like the Israelites are this band of barbarians that are just sort of rampaging through the land, killing anybody and everybody they come across? And they don't care if it's a man, a woman, or a child, or even an animal. They're just going to kill everything. I think a lot of times that's how we read the story, isn't it? And what we need to understand is that's not exactly what's going on here. You see, God is a lot more strategic than that. That when Israel takes the promised land, they're not just going around to any random town or village killing anybody they come across. You see, they're targeting specific military outposts. Some of them are going to be bigger. You see that with Jericho, right? Jericho is this massive fortress. Some of them are smaller, like Ai. We're going to look at them today. It's just kind of this small little outpost in the middle of nowhere that's kind of forgotten about. But they're military outposts, and the idea here is that as Israel is taking the land, they're defeating outpost after outpost after outpost. And the people who are living in the land around those areas, as those outposts fall, what's going to happen? They're going to start to feel unsafe. And they're going to retreat further and further and further into the land until they're totally driven out of the land. Does that make sense? So that's the idea. That's the plan here. And so God tells them, okay, now's the time that we're going to take the promised land. But here's the deal. He's also got some rules of engagement. And I want you to notice one of them in Joshua 6, beginning in verse 18. It says this. God says this, but keep away from the devoted things. Hold on to that phrase real quick. Keep away from the devoted things so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. See, his phrase where it talks about the devoted things, what that's talking about is idols, right? Idols to other gods. And what you need to understand is that, first of all, every town, every village would have idols. And idols were often the most valuable things they would have in a given town, village, military outpost, whatever, because they were usually made of the most valuable materials they had, gold, silver, something like that. And part of that was because making it out of gold and silver and the most valuable stuff was an act of worship. And so as they're taking the land, there's going to be a temptation to take these idols made of gold and silver, right? All of this money is just there for the taking. God says, don't touch it. Don't take it, because if you're taking it, what's happening is you're bringing this other god into our community. And over time, there's going to be a temptation to begin to turn to that god and even worship that god. Have nothing to do with it. Otherwise, you're going to make the whole camp liable to destruction. Okay, so there's this one big rule, and that's where we're going to pick up in Joshua chapter 7. Joshua 7, Israel has just taken the big city of Jericho, and I want you to notice the very first thing that happens. Joshua 7, verse 1. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. It says, Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah. I feel like I'm naming dwarves in Lord of the Rings. Of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against them. So right away, right off the bat, somebody ends up taking some of these idols, these devoted things. And what I want you to notice here is that God gets mad, right? But God doesn't just get mad at Achan, who took the devoted things. He doesn't just get mad at his family, who probably would have been in the know, because again, this is an ancient world, tight-knit communities, especially family groups were very, very tight-knit. God doesn't just get mad at them. God gets mad at all of Israel. And in fact, God is going to end up punishing all of Israel because of one person's sin. That's not fair, is it? I mean, how many of us have ever been in that situation? Like in elementary school? Do you know what I'm talking about? You know where I'm going, right? Where somebody did something dumb and all of the class missed recess because Timmy did that thing. And everybody's mad at Timmy, right? It's just not fair. Like, why do we have to be punished? Everybody knows Timmy did it. Why are we being punished? And I think it's the same sort of thing here. We look at this and we're like, okay, why is God going to punish all of Israel because one person messed up? And the reason that this is happening is because, listen, this is the nature, and we've talked about this before. This is the nature of what it means to live in community. That when we live lives connected to each other, what one of us does has the potential to affect all of us, doesn't it? What one of us does has the potential to affect all of us. You know this. Students, you've been there. How many of you remember doing that group assignment where there was that one kid who didn't do their share? And because that one kid didn't do their share, you got a worse grade. How many of us adults have ever had that moment where you had to work overtime because that one person didn't do something, and now everybody's scrambling to sort of make it happen, right? Parents, you know this is true. This is why you are very, very concerned about who your kids hang out with, isn't it? Because you know that not only does that other child have the potential to impact the choices of your child, but more than that, if that child does something dangerous enough, it has the potential to affect your kids. That this is the nature of what it means to live in community. What happens to one of us has the potential to affect all of us. And bringing another God's idol into the camp is exactly one of those things. That all of Israel is going to have to deal with the consequences of one person's mistake. Goes on, verse 2. It says, now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-aven to the east of Bethel, and told them, okay, go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. And when they returned to Joshua, they said, okay, look, not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 to take it. And do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. Let me translate that. It is a small military outpost, right? Like there's not a lot of people. You don't need to waste everybody's time. We don't need to send everybody out. Couple thousand people, easy peasy. This is a cakewalk. We can do this in our sleep. But notice what happens next. Verse 4. So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gates as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. And at this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. They got routed. And I know what you're thinking. Like, how many of us read that and we're like, okay, but it wasn't that bad? Right? I mean, come on. You sent 3,000 people, 36 died. Like, percentage-wise, if you're here and you're like a math guy, a percentage guy, you're like, okay, but that's not bad. And in fact, statistically, I see one math person who's laughing in the back. They get it. But statistically, like, that many may have died in the trip. And so, okay, like, it's not that bad. But here's the deal. Sometimes the little defeats, the little losses in life take the most out of us, don't they? Especially the ones that you think are going to be easy, especially the times when we get a little bit overconfident. And that's what happens here. Yeah, not a lot of people died, but this was supposed to be easy. This was supposed to be a cakewalk. They should have been able to do this in their sleep, and they got whooped. By the way, this is what happens when we stop working with God and we start working against God. Even the things that should be easy, even the things that should be in our capacity to do, all of a sudden those things somehow start to get a whole lot harder, a whole lot more difficult. And in fact, what's weird about this is I experienced this once. I told you words were going to be hard. Back when I was in high school, I didn't do a lot in high school. I was kind of lazy, but my one thing that I did was hockey. I was one of these guys who lived and breathed hockey. I absolutely loved it. My senior year, let me tell you, I'm not going to brag a lot, but I'm going to brag today. I was on point, right? Like, I had the best year of my hockey career. I had the best numbers I had by far. We won state. I went to the All-Star game. It was just an amazing year. I was on cloud 9. And I knew, like, I was just made to do this. You ever been there? You ever felt like you were just made to do something? It just came so easy and so natural. In that year, like, after state, I had all this stuff lined up. I was going to do a summer league, which is kind of casual. After that, I was going to go to a college and play hockey. I was feeling good. Here's the problem. After we won state, I felt like God was saying, okay, I want you to hang him up. I want you to stop playing hockey. I had a couple of problems with that. First of all, I didn't want to. Second of all, it was one of those things, and I know you know what this is like because we've all had this awkward moment where we're thinking to ourselves, okay, was that really God or was that just in my head? You ever had that thought? It's like, I really don't know if that's God or in my head, but I've got this summer league lined up. I'm already set to go to college. Everything's already in play. God, this is information that would have been helpful yesterday. Like, I'm just going to keep doing what I already signed up to do. And so I went to this summer league, right? And understand something. Coming off of, like, state championship, coming off of all-star, like, super competitive stuff, right? Summer league was supposed to be a breeze. I mean, it's one of those things, super casual, no challenge. I'm just trying to stay in shape. Let me tell you, I got my butt whooped. It was bad. And all the simple, easy things that just came so natural, I couldn't do it anymore. It's like my brain totally forgot what it was doing. It totally said, okay, I've never played hockey before. And I was just struggling to do the basic things. I'm like, man, that's weird. And then I went to college. Now, I was like a freshman, right? Like third string. We had a couple other guys who were ahead of me. Same thing. Like the things that were natural, the things that came easy. It's almost as if God said, okay, I gave you this gift and this ability for a season of life, but it's over now. And since you didn't listen to me when I said to hang it up, I'm going to show you that you don't do this anymore. The things that came natural just didn't happen. And then one night I had a dream where God was like, okay, for real, quit. I was like, okay, fine. Tired of fighting. You see, when we stop working with God and we start working against God, the things that should be easy get a whole lot harder. It's almost like running against the wind. Or it's kind of like, you ever have one of those dreams where you're running but you're not getting anywhere? Don't you hate that dream? It's like you're going as fast as you can, and it's like you're running through mud. That's what it felt like. This is where Israel is. They found themselves working against God, and the thing that was within their capability, their capacity to do, they just couldn't do it. And so Joshua is upset. He's heartbroken. Notice what it says, Joshua 7, verse 6. It says, then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down on the ground before the ark of the Lord and remained there until evening. The elders of Israel did the same, and they sprinkled dust on their heads. This is all a sign of mourning, right? This idea of tearing your clothes is for them the symbol. It's like a symbol or a sign of complete and utter anguish. It's meant to sound like the tearing of somebody's heart as it's ripped in half. So Joshua is heartbroken. He tears his clothes, he falls face down in front of the ark, and he's there all day until evening, right? Like this is an all evening sort of thing. And then it says this in verse 7, Joshua prays. Joshua said, alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. I want to stop here really quick because sometimes I just kind of cue in on words. You ever do that? And I just kind of want to talk about this word content because I think sometimes we hear this word content and we think to ourselves, okay, we need to always be content. Paul talks about being content, right? And being content isn't a bad thing. There are times when we need to be content. But we also need to understand that when God calls us to do something, we're supposed to do it. We're supposed to be active. We're supposed to be passionate. We're supposed to be boldly persistent in those things. God didn't want him to be content on the other side. He wanted him to be faithful. Goes on to say this. I love this part. He says, pardon your servant, Lord. You ever have one of those prayers where you have to apologize to God before you pray? Right? Like this is going to be an angry prayer. You ever have an angry prayer before? Because I've had a lot of them. Before I go on, understand something. Angry prayers aren't bad. I think sometimes when it comes to prayer, we think that all prayer should be sort of like this reserved and kind of like formal thing. Oh, sovereign Lord, right? And yes, we need to be reverent. But God also wants us to be honest. God wants to hear our heart. And sometimes that means we get angry with God. And that's okay because God's big enough to handle your anger, your hurt, and your pain. God wants you to be honest. There's nothing wrong with angry prayers. But understand, this is going to be an angry prayer. He says, pardon your servant, Lord, but what can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this. And they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. Basically, he's saying, great. Now, we're all going to die because we've been embarrassed. Everybody's going to hear about this. It's like high school. It's like lunchroom. Everybody's going to know by lunchtime. Everybody's going to come around and beat us up, right? We're going to be destroyed. And then he goes on to say this. And then what will you do, God, for your own great name? I love this because talk about conceited, right? Basically, what he's saying here is, okay, God, when you think about it, you kind of need us. After all, we're your people, you're our God. What happens to us is a reflection of you. It sounds a little bit conceited, doesn't it? Like you need us. And what I want you to understand here is, like, yes, this is not his best moment, but he's also in a really dark place. He's going through a hard time. He spent all day after this miserable defeat face down in silence before the ark of the Lord. He's in a very bad place. And the problem is, you guys know this, whenever you're in a bad place and you get yourself alone for a long period of time, that bad thing that happens just tends to get worse and worse and worse and worse, doesn't it? Until that little thing becomes a big thing. This is where Joshua is. He's mad, he's frustrated, and basically, he's blaming God for everything that happened. And so he spends all this time in prayer, which again is basically blaming God, and then it's God's turn. Verse 10. Notice what God says. The Lord said to Joshua, he says, stand up. What are you doing on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen, they have lied, and they have put them with their own possessions. That is why Israel can't stand against their enemies. They've turned their backs and they run because they have been made liable to destruction. He says, I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Verse 13. Go, consecrate the people and tell them to consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel, and you cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them. I love this because God begins by saying the thing that none of us expect him to say. He says, get up, quit praying, stop praying and get up. See, that's so weird, right? Because we expect God to say, okay, just pray about it. You need to take some time and pray about it, right? And I'm going to do something about it. But that's not what he says. He says, quit praying. Now listen, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that we shouldn't pray. What I am saying is that there is a time to pray, and then there's a time to act, a time to do something about it. And the problem that I think we run into is we want to stop at the prayer thing, don't we? When it comes to our problems, when it comes to our issues, we want to stop and say, okay, God, I need you to do something about this. And so here, like I'm handing it off to you. The ball is in your court, God. I'm washing my hands. This is your deal now. And we need to understand that, listen, there are times when we need to stop and we need to pray, especially when there are things bigger than us, things that are outside of our control, like what's happening in the Ukraine. That what's happening around the world with all this violence, all this destruction, is beyond me. We need to be stopping and praying. But there are also things that we need to do something about. And that's what God's saying here. He's saying, get up and go do something about it. Because the problem is that Israel has sinned. You see, the whole while you were blaming me, you should have been looking at yourself, doing a little bit of self-evaluation. And listen, this is at the heart of what makes blaming others so dangerous. This is what's at the heart of why blaming others will keep you stuck in life. How many of us have ever felt stuck in the mud? Like life is just stuck, we're spinning our wheels, we're not getting anywhere. See, one of the reasons I think we get stuck is because of blame. Because the problem with blame is when it comes to blame, we spend all of our time blaming this stuff out here, right? We're blaming Bob at accounting. We're blaming our schedule. We're blaming the program. We're blaming God. We're blaming everything else. But what if the problem is not out there? What if the problem's in here? What if the problem is something to do with me? But because I'm spending all my time blaming, I'm not looking to find out what it is. This is why blame can be so devastating to our lives. It's a distraction from what's really stopping us, from what's really holding us back. the things that are anchors that are keeping us from moving forward. That for Israel, it was these idols, these devoted things. And as long as those devoted things were in the camp of Israel, they were never going to move forward, are they? And listen, the same thing is true with us. Because we all, from time to time, have devoted things in our lives, don't we? We all have this junk, this sin in our life that's holding us back. And I say this all the time, but when it comes to sin, the thing we got to remember about sin is that sin, the reason that God is so strong against sin is because sin is destructive. It's something that's always going to hold us back. It's always going to tear us down. The reason that God is strong against sin is because sin is strong against you. And from time to time, we all have this junk, this sin in our life, and it's like an anchor that is holding us back and keeping us from moving forward. And if you spend all your time blaming everybody and everything else, you're going to miss the thing that's really stopping you. While you're blaming everybody else, God is saying to you, what are the devoted things that are holding you back, that are keeping you from moving forward? What are the devoted things that's stopping you? The things in your life, the sin in your life that you know you need to get rid of. You know you need to cut it out. You know that it's going to always hold you back. What is that thing that you need to let go of? That you need to stop praying about and do something about? Because until you do, like Israel, you're going to find yourself stuck in the mud. So my challenge for you is, what is that one thing this week that you need to start dealing with? Maybe for you, it's something big like an addiction. Whether that's something like drugs, alcohol, pornography. Maybe for you, it's something a little bit smaller like blame, lying. Maybe for you, it's something else. I don't know what it might be for you. But what are the devoted things in your camp that you need to get rid of right now? And what are you going to do about it this week? What is at least one step, one thing that you can do this week to start to cut that thing out of your life? And I want you to imagine what it would be like to be free from that thing. Imagine what it would be like to finally find yourself free of the mud that's holding you back, free of the anchor that's keeping you tied down. So you can be finally free to step into the life that God is calling you into. What are those devoted things? Let me pray for us. God, thank you so much for today. God, thank you for sunshine and warmer weather. God, we do pray for the hurt and pain, those who are suffering around the world. I pray for peace. God, I pray that you would open our eyes, that you would show us the devoted things in our life. And God, I pray that you'd give us the wisdom to know the times that we're blaming when we need to be looking in the mirror. Give us the wisdom to know when we're coming up with excuses when we need to take responsibility. And give us the courage to do it, even when we know it's going to hurt. Because taking responsibility for our mistakes usually hurts. But God, we know that you're going to meet us in that moment. God, give us the courage to say,